Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week of macroeconomics principles. This week, we're going to be talking about a very exciting concept: long run economic growth. Why are some nations poor? Why are some nations rich? What type of government policies can governments do to help encourage long run growth? Let's take a look at the following family. They're British, and based off that windbreaker, it's definitely the 90s. This is all of their worldly possessions drug out onto the street for you to view. They have two automobiles, they've got televisions and furniture, they've got a sailboat. Very nice. This is a family from an advanced economy. GDP per capita in the UK is around $40,000. These numbers are a few years ago. Child mortality rate, 0.04%. That means 0.04% of babies die before the age of 5 years old. Access to modern sanitation facilities, 100%. Everybody's got a bathroom or a modern hospital, etc., or at least access to one. Educational attainment, 60% are enrolled in higher education. Let's go to a middle income country. Here we have an average family in Mexico. Their GDP per capita in that nation is around $16,000. Child mortality, 1.3%. Very low, a little higher, but still very low. Access to modern sanitation facilities, 85%, which is almost full penetration into the country, but not quite total. The percent of the population that is in higher education is half that of Britain at 30%. But still, we can see they live in a comfortable apartment. Picture looks also from the 90s. They have a television, they have lots of furniture, lots of clothing, etc. Going to a country that's on the lower end of the income spectrum, here we have a family from Mali, one of the poorer nations in the world, and you can see in the picture that their possessions largely include kitchen utensils, basic furniture, and that's about it. GDP per capita in this country, $1,500 per year. Comparing Great Britain, which was at 40,000, here we have 1,500 per year. I mean, how many of your paychecks are 1,500 per month? And they're living off of that per year. Child mortality, much higher. 11% of children die before the age of 5. Access to modern sanitation facilities, only a quarter of the population. And 4-year educational attainment, the select few, 7% in the country. Here's just a broad picture of the disparity we see in the world. Some nations are rich, some nations are poor, and we have countries in between. Not all countries grow at the same rate. Here we have countries ranked by which ones grew the fastest over the past 100 years or so. Brazil at the top, growing at 2.6%, and the Great Britain growing at 1.4%. Now you might be asking, wait, Great Britain, one of the richest nations out there, only growing at 1.4% during this period? Aren't they the richest nation? Yes. But if you notice in the graph, Great Britain started off in the period as one of the richest nations. Their GDP per capita in 1870 was 5,000, whereas in Brazil, the GDP per capita was only $800 per year. Towards the end of this period, even though Brazil grew very fast, they're still relatively poor compared to the other nations, but they're a lot richer than they used to. This also denotes a common pattern in developing countries. The poorer ones will grow quicker as they are catching up to the rich nations, as they are adopting their technology that the rich nations have already developed. The US, by 1870, it was a rich nation. It was a developed country. The GDP per capita was $4,000 per year. Coming in at 2014 numbers, it's at $55,000 per year. It's the richest country on the list we have here. The growth rate during this period was 1.8%, just under 2%. If you're poor, you don't always have to be poor. Here's a nice cityscape of Singapore. Singapore incomes were very low in 1960, but today they surpass America's GDP per capita. Rich countries can't take their status for granted. Just because you are rich once does not mean you will be rich forever. If you have any doubt of this, just look at the Roman Empire. Western Europe, a few centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire, was one of the poorer places on the earth. Productivity, quantity of goods and services produced from each unit of labor input. So output per worker. We can show this by Y divided by L, where Y is real GDP. We're measuring this controlling for inflation. And L is labor. Is productivity a stock or a flow? It's a flow. So let's see why. Real GDP, stock or flow, is a flow every year. It's output per year, gross domestic product per year. Labor is a stock. How many workers do you have in your country? So this is the flow of GDP divided by the stock of labor in that country. So productivity is a flow. How much is produced per worker in that given year? How do we get it bigger? How do we make productivity grow more? That's going to give us some long run growth. First, capital accumulation. Physical capital is represented by all the machines and software and buildings and cars and all the other physical things that you need in order to produce something else. Here we have a mural in Detroit depicting all the factories that went into creating the automobile industry. Physical capital is going to be denoted by a K. We do that for two reasons. One, because C is already taken. Usually if you see C in an economic context, it's going to refer to cost. But then the second reason has to do with Karl Marx. I mean, his first name was Karl with a K. But his big book, Das Kapital, The Capital, in German, capital starts with a K. And he was one of the first economists to really be concerned with capital accumulation. So capital starts with a K in economics. Capital is defined as the stock of equipment and structures used to produce other things. So capital are goods and services used to create other goods and services. That's their purpose. Again, I want to emphasize it doesn't necessarily have to be tangible to be called physical capital. Software is a growing portion of physical capital. We're going to be concerned with physical capital per worker. How many shovels does each worker have? As you increase physical capital per worker, so as there's more shovels and more backhoes and more machines per worker, productivity will increase. The next form of capital is called human capital. Human capital refers to education you acquire, training you receive on the job, learning you do inside your own head. It's all that book learning. Knowledge and skills workers acquire through education and training and experience. You don't have to go through a formal program to get human capital. We are also concerned with human capital per worker. Now, what this means is how much training inside someone's head. Big H refers to the total amount of education in the society, the aggregate amount of human capital. Human capital per worker is, well, how much total quantity of education do we have per individual? So you can have someone who has 15 years of education, and that helps increase H. But if the rest of the population is kind of averaging elementary education, 6 years or something, the average human capital per worker in the society will be smaller. Again, increased human capital per worker will cause an increase in productivity. One of the other inputs into increasing aggregate economic growth are natural resources. Natural resources are all the land, the rivers, the water, the resources, the minerals, the oil and energy, your forests, etc. How does that influence productivity? Well, the more land you have per worker, the greater your ability to make stuff in an economy. Natural resources, although instinctively we might think are very important to long-run economic growth, this actually is more of a controversial thing. A lot of economists have studied it and said, you don't need a lot of natural resources to be a rich country. Let's go back to Singapore. What type of natural resource does Singapore have? They do have access to the ocean. They have a very natural harbor, but they are a rich country not because they have a huge oil mine or because they have a huge gold mine. They are a rich country because of their human capital accumulation. As the economy moves more and more towards services, natural resources will become less and less a priority in increasing economic growth. Technological knowledge represented by A. This is huge. This is the big catch-all. Society's understanding of production. Technological process means faster computers, higher definition television, or a smaller cell phone. This is any knowledge that boosts productivity. It doesn't have to be just better information technology or a nicer computer, but anything that improves the process of your doing. So as McDonald's improves the way that they create hamburgers, improves the machinery they have there, they might not have more machinery. If their machines are more efficient, then they're going to increase their output. One big example of this is Henry Ford and the assembly line. Change the way you organize a manufacturing plant, which increased productivity. So what's the difference between A, kind of this total productivity measure, and H, which is the education? A represents society's understanding of how to produce goods and services, such as a patent. Here's a picture of the very first electrical outlet patent. Once this patent is filed, it becomes public information. Once the patent expires, everyone can build upon it, or you can innovate off of it as well. This is knowledge that the entire economy has. Whereas human capital is knowledge that individuals have and possess. This results from the effort people expend to acquire this knowledge. Going to school takes work. You right now are investing in your human capital, and I hope it's taking you some work to master the material in this class. So we've just accumulated the main components that drive economic growth. Let's keep going to see how we can promote it.